This is Point FM 99.1.
Okay, glad that you have stayed with us here at 99.1. Check your time, just about 10 minutes after the 11th hour of the day. 10 minutes after 11. Good morning to you wherever you are. I have in studio with me this morning officials from the Standard of Bureau, Antigua and Barbuda Bureau of Standards and World Standards Day. That's this year. They're going to be talking to me about that. Let me take it down a little bit here. The Antigua and Barbuda Bureau of Standards joins with other standards entities worldwide to more or less celebrate World Standards Day yearly on October 14. And we here at Point FM, we've invited them to come to us here. We want to talk to them a little bit about what's going on with that. But let me just introduce you to the team that is here from the Antigua and Barbuda Bureau of Standards. Mr. Alan Michael, the Senior Standardization Officer. Mrs. Jem Reynolds, Manager Standards Development, and Mrs. Solange Baptiste, Manager Information Services from the Antigua and Barbuda Bureau of Standards. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to us here at 99.1 FM. Glad to have you in our company.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, tell me, what exactly is the mandate of the Antigua and Barbuda Bureau of Standards? We could begin there. I see you. Who wants to go first here?
Okay, I'll start out.
So, Mrs. Baptiste, you go first.
Yes, so
All right.
the Antigua and Barbuda Bureau of Standards was established to not only set up standards that are relevant to Antigua and Barbuda's economic activity, but to monitor these standards and also to, one of the fancy words that we use is promulgate the standards, so show any legal requirements that apply to these standards, and of course to engage the public in the development process, and of course in any awareness activities that surround our day-to-day mandate.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell me, the Bureau itself. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that is the, if you want to say, the very basic. However, as time has gone on, the bureaus of standards around the region, around the world, are also responsible more so now for quality infrastructure in the various jurisdictions that we represent. So that is currently, if you want to say, the main mandate of the Bureau of Standards, which is to develop the quality infrastructure for Antigua and Barbuda.
How long has the Bureau been in existence?
Okay, so you're testing my history.
No, I just want to know because
the Bureau,
a lot of people are not familiar with
Right.
what really happens there, what goes on there.
Okay, so a little history. The Bureau of Standards was established by an act of Parliament for persons who are interested in legislation. They can look for Chapter 411 of the Revised Laws of Antigua and Barbuda. And the Bureau was established since 1987, but it started out actually as a desk in the Agriculture Ministry.
Under whose ambit you fall now? Or is
So
it just
we
a
fall,
government agency by
our
itself, a
act, we
statutory?
fall on the trade.
On the trade.
On the trade. And that is established in the act, so that doesn't change. So wherever trade is, we should be.
Now, Mr. Michael, I know that you are the Senior Standardization Officer, but what exactly does your role entail?
Well, basically, my area deals with, the term metrology. Metrology.
Not meteorology.
Meteorology. Metrology is the science of measurement. And under the Metrology Act of 2007, the Bureau was also made responsible for all measurements dealing mainly in trade to ensure equity in trade, such that the customer gets what he pays for. And we also, in that, ensure that the trader doesn't give away his product. The Metrology Act replaced or repealed the older Weights and Measures Act that the police used to operate by checking the scales and so on in the marketplace. And that was an old act from since 1905 or something like that. The Metrology Act is a more modern act, and it also gives the Bureau the responsibility for the measurements, not only in trade, but also in health, safety, and the environment.
Now, authorization by law, because I think Mrs. Baptiste mentioned something pertaining to the laws pertaining to the Standards Act. I think you spoke about it.
Yes.
And you spoke about metrology, measurement. What about accreditation?
Okay, so accreditation is actually one of the, if you want to say, the disciplines involved in quality infrastructure. So when we speak about metrology, metrology is one of the pillars, as we would say, of quality infrastructure. Standards, that Mrs. Reynolds will speak a little more about, is another pillar. And of course, you can well understand that that is one of the primary functions of the Bureau. Accreditation now, that involves two aspects. It's certification, testing and certification. And so out of accreditation, which is developing, if you want to say, the confidence in processes and procedures, then that is something that is to come. That is an area that the Bureau will be looking at developing, hopefully sooner rather than later, but definitely in the future. Yes.
Okay. Mrs. Reynolds, you are the manager of standards development. I guess you have quite a task on your hand. But what exactly are standards?
Okay, well, standards are documents which give requirements for products and services which make them fit for use. And they also cover your basic health and safety requirements. So these documents would be developed by various stakeholders. So it would have to be a cross-cutting, when you look at stakeholders, not only would it be a government agency, but we have to look at government, consumers, manufacturers.
So this is guided
producers.
by what? Policy then, you were saying?
Yes, well, we have our Standards Act, but then we also base these documents on the international best practice for standards development.
You have a situation, and I want to go back to in terms of measurement. I've gone to other countries, and I'm hearing less of the pounds and the ounces and so forth. Why is it that we are still using, in some of these cases, or people still do not understand metrology, do not understand the measurements that are being used in modern times? We have a problem. Is there a problem getting it across to our people?
Well, that speaks to metrication, which is another aspect of the portfolio that we have responsibility for. And metrication speaks to the change from, empirical measuring system, pounds, inches, and so on, or any other type of measurement system, to the International System of Units, the SI, which is commonly called the metric system. Now, in Antigua, that process was somewhat started since in the 70s, where in mathematics and science in schools, they have been using the metric system exclusively for teaching those subjects. Unfortunately, it has not progressed to the outside world in Antigua and Barbuda. Several attempts have been made, but because it's not an easy thing to accomplish. It involves many persons, all the stakeholders, all the different sectors, because each sector cannot necessarily move at the same pace. And there are certain implications, long term sometimes, that prohibits you just changing overnight. Because if you consider, the one I usually like to use is people's houses. When you build your house to last for 20 years or more. And normally, at the moment, we tend to use empirical pipes and fittings in our houses. Now, there aren't any adapters that go between the empirical and the metric. So if we were to say tomorrow that we are no longer selling imperial pipes, and we're only selling metric, and you couldn't get an imperial pipe in Antigua, and the pipe in your house bursts in the wall, you'll be up the creek.
With
Because,
the flood.
right, you wouldn't be able to find a pipe that could, be joined to it easily. So those are things that have to be properly planned and properly phased in and out. So it has taken a while. We have made, even in the Bureau, we have made attempts to get that process again, but we haven't given up. And it's something that we are moving back to, especially now that there is a new definition of the SI system being concluded. That will be done in November, and the new definitions will go into effect from World Metrology Day 2019, which is the 20th of May. Right? So we are again going to be making some effort to bring attention back to the SI system and start to see how we can get persons to move along with that.
Now, standards. I would believe that you work closely with other agencies in terms of international standards. Who are some of your partners locally? And perhaps you could tell us about internationally as well.
Okay, so yes, we do work with the various agencies. And like I mentioned, in just developing the standards, you have to include various stakeholders. So we'd have the various ministries. In fact, we've had, I think, almost all of them as part of our committees which develop standards. For example, the Ministry of Tourism, the ministry, well, our own ministry, Ministry of Trade, and we have Ministry of Health. So and agriculture, right? So almost every ministry would be involved, along with other agencies like
Consumer affairs.
Consumer Affairs, correct? Because they also play a very.
There's a
important
reason why
part
I'm
of
saying
it.
consumer affairs too, because I noticed that there has been an influx of Chinese products on the market here in Antigua. Who monitors and evaluate, who basically look for these substandard products that come to, and excuse me for saying so, but it's factual, and you know what I'm talking about. You go to them, you buy something, and everybody tell you, oh, because it's Chinese, it will just mash up quickly. But who looks into matters like this, where substandard products come to this country?
Okay. Well, the Bureau doesn't do this, but I think Consumer Affairs does do some monitoring of the products on the shelf. The part the Bureau could play, or I could say that we would like us to play a more active part in, is the labeling. So we've developed the labeling standards. Currently they're voluntary because standards in their nature are voluntary. So persons can or can decide whether or not they use the labeling standards. But if these were to become technical regulations, then that would present a different case. So although the products come in with the various labels, there's no really, how to say, control.
No,
on
we
that.
have to rely on voluntary compliance. So the standards are there, the information is there for persons who are interested in it. However, the next level, if you want to say, for the Bureau would be to have the technical regulations and then be able to do the monitoring and enforcement of the specifications pertaining to the labeling that would apply for safety.
Speaking about quality and substandard quality, but is there any sort of protection, like, you're pushing a drive to a total quality culture, anything of that sort?
Yes, there is the drive because we want to have a quality infrastructure. But then when it comes to use of it, for example, our standards, we'd like to see persons actually, make use of them. I know they're voluntary, but then that is the nature of standards, and being voluntary allows you to use it. I mean, not every time do you have to have a regulation in place for you to implement the basic health and safety requirements. So standards would give you that opportunity to do it without the enforcement agency always over your back.
Right. If I might say, this is where our consumers are really important.
The public.
Yes. You and I, everyone else, very important in looking for and seeking out, the appropriate quality for goods and services.
So you're saying it's also incumbent on the general public to
very much so
be a part of the equation in terms of
Very
building a
much
culture
so. Yes,
of quality.
in terms of the quality culture. Yes,
The best
a
form of
culture.
regulation is self-regulation.
There you go.
I like that one.
There you
Right.
go.
So if it doesn't meet your standards and quality, don't buy it.
You spoke about the calibration of scales and so forth. What about those pumps, gas pumps and so on?
We started checking the gas pumps last year for the first time. Well, the act actually went into force in April last year. So we started checking the pumps last year to ensure that they are delivering what you're purchasing. And that has gone well. We have just completed the exercise again this year. So you can be assured that the pumps that are delivering correctly, all the stations.
Okay, so you're on a drive now. I understand yesterday was your media day. You missed me by a few hours because I wasn't here yesterday. I'd rather have you on the same day you were doing your media blitz. But you have a week of
That's
activities going
simple
on.
Technicality.
Yes.
That's a technicality.
So you're out there now on the drive. Under what banner, by the way? What's your theme for this year's celebration?
Okay, so the international theme is International Standards and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And what we are keen on emphasizing is that you can't have Fourth Industrial Revolution without standards. Standards is really what makes everything work from nation to nation across continents around the world, period. The whole issue of compatibilities, again, whether you're talking in all the various forms of technology that are now forming part and parcel of some of our everyday functions, is what is driven by standards. It's actually possible because of standards. And so we are let us look at the importance of standards for Antigua and Barbuda and Antigua and Barbuda's relevance in forging ahead and advancing in various areas of industry within the scope of the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
So you're saying that everybody basically is, throughout the entire globe, celebrating on a special day all that we have been talking about here. You're pushing your own personal agenda here in Antigua and Barbuda. Over the years, how successful a response, in terms of response, have you seen people coming to you after this? Especially, and I'm going to ask you, what services, other than what we have spoken about so far, if there's any that you'd like to share with us, is there any other service that you offer?
Well, overarching to anything that we do is always the awareness component. So if, for example, if there's an entity, whether church, school, that is interested in finding out about standards or wants to be involved, we can offer that awareness component. We can, come in, speak, we have the conversation, see how they can interact with us or assist with the processes, especially in the area of standards development. That is where we really need the public to be integrally involved. For persons who have specialized areas of expertise, if they can offer suggestions and propose standards, and I think that is the starting of the standards development process, right? Proposing, whether from an industry standpoint or maybe if there's something that you see is going wrong in country, and you're saying, look, I think we need a standard for this. There is a process. You can offer that proposal. It's vetted and so on. And once there is a sound established need and it's relevant for the economy and the needs and concerns for Antigua and Barbuda, then the process should more than likely go forward.
How important is the role of the Bureau in terms of our economy? how would you
it's
put it in a
important.
nutshell? And I want different takes here, if you don't mind. I'd
By
like
all
your
means.
idea on it. Yeah.
My first point on that is we live in, well, our economy, yes, is Antigua and Barbuda, but our scope is global. We have to make,
I think
we
that
have to
answer, I think
find.
that answers for everybody then.
No, well, it can be elaborated.
Yes,
It can be
yes.
elaborated. The scope of our existence and our relevance as a nation is global. And that is, if you want to say, the greater side of the focus, I think, right now. I'll put a full stop there.
Someone of you mentioned the Ministry of Health. You work in collaboration with them.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
But like in what area? I'm trying to, and the Ministry of Agriculture. I can see the Ministry of Agriculture, but for some reason I'm not picking up where I could fit this in with the Ministry of Health. So,
Everybody eats.
but that's falling
Health and safety.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, but in every clinic and doctor's office, you have a scale, you have a thermometer,
Mhm.
you have a blood pressure device. Those are the things that the doctor uses to determine basically your present health condition to start with. And if the measurements that he takes are not correct,
I won't answer. I won't answer. What about persons who are being challenged? You work along with them as well, the persons who are disabled?
Differently abled?
Yeah.
Yes, physically challenged. We seek to engage them, especially in our standards development process, for various things. Personally, that's an area I think I would like to see more done, and not even on a basis. I mean, I think when we look at the differently abled community, persons with disabilities, we tend to kind of throw them in a silo. I think what we need to do, concept-wise and perception-wise, is just to understand that it is part of our human condition. And we need to facilitate it, right? We need to facilitate it. So in anything, any sort of standards development process, any sort of process that we are pursuing, that we want to elaborate, we need to consider this aspect of our human condition and not, try and put it in a silo by itself or tuck it in a corner by itself. That is something that I think. So for me, it's a matter of consistent consideration in all areas, basically.
Who monitors and evaluates, like stakeholders' compliance with the standards that are put in place? Is there a respective individual that looks specifically to this area in terms of monitoring and enforcement and making sure that the stakeholders comply with what is being put in terms of standard?
For monitoring and compliance, it would have to become a technical regulation. Standards are voluntary in nature, so it's to encourage persons to implement it, to use them. But then once you start going into enforcement and compliance, you start to look at technical regulations.
All right, and these are enforced by law.
Yes.
And if I could add a slightly different perspective, well, not different, but additional perspective. Now, we spoke earlier about quality and quality infrastructure, and one of the areas of standardization that the Bureau of Standards tries to really emphasize is that whole issue of quality management. So, if Point FM wants to do a quality management for this program, they want to have a standard for this program and have a procedure and so forth.
Guide me through it,
Right?
step by step, if you don't
Okay.
mind.
So, first of all, purchase the standard. Get familiar with what maybe say ISO 9001 quality management standard says. How you are to actually document your procedures, what inputs for this procedure you would need, and so forth. One of the things, the main areas of standardization when it comes to quality management is the cycle, what they call the quality cycle. That's plan, do, check, and act. and it's a cycle. So by the time you reach to act, you then have to plan on what you've acted on. You carry out your do, you check it. So it's a constant cycle of activity and surveillance and monitoring of your activity. So when you asked who does the monitoring, internally you can have a system where someone is established as your quality manager or your quality coordinator, and that person could then be tasked to monitor and give the feedback, give the feedback, maybe the awareness and so forth for your quality system internally. So it's like life. What can happen on the macro level can also happen on the micro level.
In terms of information services, I'm hearing things like Codex Contact Point, things that I'm not familiar with. I'm hearing National Inquiry Point and WTO TBT agreement. Could somebody explain those to me, please? Because I'm a bit lost here.
Okay, so there's some language issues here. Okay, so of course, WTO, World Trade Organization,
yes.
And TBT is for Technical Barriers to Trade. Now, standards are in themselves, if you want to say, the facilitators of trade or basis for international trade, right? So the relevance of the Bureau of Standards being the national inquiry point for the agreement on technical barriers to trade is that because we are the ones who are the custodians of the standardization process and standards for national standards. We also participate in the certain international standards development activities, as well as regional. And that's an area that Mrs. Reynolds could definitely say a little more about.
Mrs. Reynolds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we are members of, for example, the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standardization and Quality. So we would contribute to the development of regional standards. We also participate in international standards. So you would have the International Organization for Standardization, which is ISO.
Yes.
So we're also members of this organization, and we do participate in international standards development. And once standards are developed internationally, we would adopt it, well, not all of them, but what is applicable to Antigua and Barbuda, then we would adopt them nationally, as long as it is one of our national economic priorities. So our standards are based on, well, our plans are based on the national economic priorities. And this is where we would start our national process.
So what's the Codex? What is it? Codex Contact Point?
Contact point.
I'm at a loss with this one. You know,
Okay,
I'm trying to figure
so
out where exactly are we headed with this
Going
one.
back to a question you asked earlier, you were asking basically how do we really relate to, you said you understood agriculture, but you weren't quite sure about health. So the Codex Alimentarius is a joint food initiative for standards in food safety, and protocols for trade in food. That's a joint initiative between the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, and the World Health Organization. So these two bodies, the parent bodies, have this child called Codex Alimentarius. And because it is inherently a standards initiative, the Bureau of Standards is also tasked with as the focal point or contact point for Codex in Antigua and Barbuda. And so that falls under information services. We interact with the Secretariat, the Codex Secretariat, either in Rome or Geneva, Switzerland. And we interact regionally and internationally with different bodies that host the various codex committees for different areas of standardization. So in this effort, information services actually works with standards development because the two have to come together to facilitate our contribution, if you want to say, to international standards in food, food safety, and trade in food.
So you have a number of things to do between now and the 14th of this month. That's leading up to, in your pertaining to your celebration. So your media blitz was yesterday. Today, what are you doing?
So today, well, the media stuff actually got shifted somewhat to today. And as I mentioned earlier, that's a technicality because, we might have our plans, but then other things come up from time to time, and then you have to otherwise facilitate. But truth be said, that at any time, I think was a good time to share information. So setting a date is one thing, but whenever it is possible, when it is necessary, we are more than willing to come and share, and also to just enlighten, because as you yourself said, you don't really understand, and trust me, you are not alone. Unfortunately,
when
you may be part of a majority.
Just reading it, I said, this is a bit confusing to me here, so I said I would ask for some elucidation. It is quite a lot. It is quite a lot. And I must admit, I've heard about the Bureau of Standards, and I always question, what is it that they really do? And you coming here this morning and expressing some of these things, telling us about some of these things, I believe that the listeners, like myself, a novice to this, we are now more enlightened, so to speak. So leading up to the 14th, you have quite a number of things to do. You said that yesterday, it has now transitioned into today as well. You have some visit to the schools as well?
Right. So that was one of the activities. And before I turn over to Mrs. Reynolds to speak a bit more on that, what I want to say is that we have found the need over the years to try and get education to be one of our primary stakeholders. Because what we've noted, for example, even in dealing with metrology, these are some of the, if you want to say, bits of information and discipline that we need the children to grow with, so that when we come, for example, to metrication, it won't be, a dissonance between what I do at school and what I do in everyday life.
But how do you get that message across? How are you going to get the schools involved this way?
So,
other than to wait until every year that particular time to come out to them?
No, so this is it. So we are looking at having a more, if you want to say, integral input into, well, I mean, if I were to say my wish list or the dream is that we will actually get standards information and standards education to be part of the various curricula. Right?
Okay.
So whether we're talking about agricultural science, the social sciences, the natural sciences in terms of math and technology and so forth, that every aspect that the children will come through their academic disciplines, understanding that there's this area called standards that applies to whatever I'm doing, and I need to be aware of it.
I'm smiling because, speaking of standards, is there a special standard way that one should dress when one is coming to your place of work, to the Bureau of Standards?
Yes,
you're going to some.
We try to observe what is acceptable for interacting in government
I don't
offices.
want to walk in there in a vest and the next thing I'm embarrassed. Somebody tells me you can't come in here. We have standards here, So tell me, is there a particular, because I know that there has been a shift recently where some people, I've seen it with APOA, for example. You can't just walk in there nowadays wearing just anything. You have to be properly attired. Is there certain standards that you look out for people coming to your workplace as well?
Definitely. I would sum it up this way. It's based mainly on modesty and being clean and tidy. All right.
Now, what about if I need more information? Where can I get more information about the Bureau of Standards?
Okay, so we have a website. I feel like I'm doing all the talking.
No, it's okay.
We have
they
a
can
website.
Respond to you, they can respond.
We have a website. Of course, our email, our administrative email, if persons have inquiries, they can write in at abbs@ab.gov.ag. Our website is www.abbs.gov. Our main number is 462-2424. Be careful how you dial that number. We don't want you calling cable TV. So 462-2424 is our main number, and persons can feel free to stop in at Old Parham Road. That is just next to Antigua Motors, and speak with us if they're in the area and something comes to mind.
What about challenges? I'm sitting and I'm wondering, how challenging is it in terms of getting people? You spoke about the contribution of the public in terms of building that quality culture, but how difficult it is or challenge it is to get people into doing so.
Anyway,
Are there challenges?
definitely.
Yes. When it comes to the standards development process, when we
Into your microphone.
have to develop these standards, sit down and work on these drafts, we need stakeholders to participate in that process. So even if we have a technical committee, which is the main stakeholders that we've pulled together to work on that standard.
And from that you select people? From that to select a committee, I'm asking.
No, the committee is what we would, depend on the standard that we're developing, we would select a few persons from the various ministries or agencies or even consumers to work on that standard. But when it has to go out to the public for comments, because remember, when we develop a standard, it's not just the committee working on it, we have to get feedback from the public. So when it comes to the stakeholders to get involved, this is where we have our challenges. So it would go on the website, you may get a press release, but then for us to get the feedback, because remember, standards affect health and safety, so it's very important that we get feedback from the public or whoever would be affected by this standard or would have to use that standard. This is where we face the challenge.
What about products that just don't meet the standard? Do you have people coming back, improving on them, and then bring them again, bringing them forward? But do you have situations like that?
Okay, well, I think one typical one would be the labeling. Right?
Well, yeah, for products themselves, we do not do any testing against standards, because remember,
Currently.
you need your
At least not
technical
for the Bureau.
regulations. But what we could assist with is if you have a label for a particular product and you want to decide and you want to use it, and you could then purchase the standard to find out whether or not you meet that standard, or we could assist you in looking at the requirements of the standard and whether or not your label actually meets that standard. So we would do it from that perspective. But
Go ahead, Ms. Baptiste.
I just wanted to raise another example, according to what you asked. Now, we do work in collaboration with a number of agencies, right, based on their different mandates and so on. So whereas you might look at a national standards body in another country and they're covering a different scope of requirements than ours. And the reason is that in a small economy such as Antigua and Barbuda, it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel and to duplicate mandates. So, for example, we partner with the Department of Analytical Services, for example, in terms of certain types of testing and so on. So they do testing for microbes and so forth in water and maybe other foods. I think they're looking very keenly at the whole issue of being able to monitor pesticides, residues, and things like that, toxic chemical residues and the like. So you would not find then that the Bureau is going to set up for that sort of monitoring activity or that sort of testing activity. But we will refer. So if persons come with these sorts of complaints, and we can definitely build the case, and it legitimizes then that okay, this definitely needs a test. We collaborate with the Department of Analytical Services in this way, and they will do the test. If there's another agency, I think Mr. Michael, when we speak about the NEC, You can.
That's the National Electrotechnical Committee, which it's almost like one of the standards bodies. It's like a technical committee on the standards development, but that looks at mainly the field of electricity, computers, anything that deals with electricity, and it
Electronics.
interfaces with the IEC, the International Electrotechnical Committee, which is the the equivalent branch for ISO in terms of standards.
But very
But it's dealing
specialized.
with electrical and electronic equipment.
Mostly electrical.
And electronics.
Yes.
Right? So there is that committee that will go through they would review the documents and come up with what standards we would need locally and look into things like that. So you have, as Mrs. Baptist said as well, what really happens is in Antigua, we have the Bureau of Standards, but in the major countries of the world, they actually have 3 separate institutions that deal with what we deal with.
So is there a particular model that we follow here in Antigua?
Well, it's mainly the same throughout the Caribbean, and more so the OECS now, because Trinidad and Jamaica have slightly changed their model, where throughout the OECS, we all have Bureau standards. We deal with the 3 different disciplines. That is standards. You have the National Metrology Institute, which normally deals with the high-level calibrations and the research and so on into instruments. And then you have your Legal Metrology Institution, which comes under the Metrology Act that deals with trade and health and safety and those kind of things.
Okay.
So in the Caribbean, there's one institution where all those things come together. But even in Mexico and those other places, there are 3 different institutions.
All right. Okay, anything else that you'd like to add before I say goodbye to you? Any one of you?
Okay, well, just to bring a little focus to the theme, which is we're reminding persons that standards are necessary for all aspects of life, and especially since we are now bridging a gap between the technological realities and our other natural physical realities, where the 2 are now merging into one, basically in the whole concept of this 4th industrial revolution, that we just want persons to really be more aware that you need to consider standards in whatever you're engaging, whatever you're doing, and also to lend support to Antigua and Barbuda's advance in this area and within the scope of 4th industrial revolution. Offer your suggestions. Please comment on the standards when they go out. Give yourself in cooperation when we're looking at metrication, because that is one of the things that we will be seeking to, we have to implement now that we have the Act and the Act has been proclaimed, that we will be implementing metrication. And so there's no if, but, or maybe then, but a matter of our time and process in this.
No, I've been hearing about the Millennium Development Goals and what is achievable before such and such time. How important is your role in terms of your development where you are now? And I'm sure that you have to be a part of the goals as well, the Millennium Development Goals. Am I correct in saying so?
Well, yes, there's been a bit of a shift actually.
Why?
They're more talking about the SDGs now, the Sustainable
Yeah.
Development Goals, of which there are quite a few more, maybe even twice as much as to the number of Millennium Development Goals. But yes, indeed, the Bureau of Standards has its part to play, especially since our mandate requires a deep involvement with the public, right? So I think one of the growing areas is going to be, again, this whole matter of stakeholder engagement and monitoring and evaluation. But then even as you mentioned the goals, so we are normally included when different agencies, maybe have their projects and so on. The Bureau of Standards is included typically because most anything that we're doing is going to require standards, especially if you're talking about just a ballpark example, the development of women, right? Women. And the getting women to be more, if you want to say, enterprising, more productive, and so on. Anything that is going to be done is going to require standards, whether it's a code of practice for food safety, how you actually a standard for actual food development. We are speaking so much about agricultural development in Antigua and Barbuda, and every product has a standard that is going to then be used for grading, for especially when it comes to export. When we speak about agro-processing is one of those areas that has taken off as a, I think, as a go-to area when you're talking about rural development and even development of women in terms of entrepreneurship and enterprise. And even in that, you have to have a standard for just about everything. Once you're processing a product, you need to have a standard for the finished product, what it should be, what it should contain, how you even go about it, the safe way, and then the nutritional, and then even looking at nutritional content and so forth. I think Mrs. Reynolds had mentioned that.
Yes, but before you continue, do you work in collaboration with the intellectual property as well?
I think we have, well, not, I don't know, not in a necessarily concerted manner. However, I would dare say, if I were to go back to my wish list, I would dare say that when a person is thinking about entrepreneurship and enterprise, that both the Bureau of Standards as well as the Intellectual Property Office should be go-to entities for, the various aspects of your whole process, right? So there, we don't work together. That.
Do you see a need, now that you have said that, do you see a need for both to work together?
I will be honest to say I would need to see. Well, I think there's always room for that. But in terms of what exactly we would be working on, I think it might be more along the line of awareness and so forth. So, for example, you're talking about intellectual property for, help me with this term. You're talking about like geographical indicators and so on. Okay, so let's pick an example. The Antigua black pineapple.
Yeah.
The standard behind the Antigua black pineapple, my layman's understanding, is we get the quality of the excuse me, the specification of an Antigua black pineapple because of unique soil composition and therefore the nutrients of this fruit and what make it as sweet as it is, as we have known it to be. So that's the standard side of it.
Yeah.
The intellectual property side of that would be supported by the maintenance of that standard. So if there is a way we can sustain the qualities and components of the soil that produces the Antigua black pineapple, and that we can do that exclusively, then we have a better chance for that geographical intellectual property of Antigua black pineapple.
I particularly like your analogy, and I fully understand what you're saying.
So it
So
travel. You have to travel a bit. You have to journey.
Yeah.
To get between one and the other.
In order for us to have that standard, we must have a high level of maintenance of the quality as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Definitely.
I want to thank all of you for dropping by today. Looking forward to hearing more. Other than that special day that comes up when we hear about Metrology Day or the World Standards Day, I think from time to time it's important that you go to the media or come to the media and keep us abreast. Keep us abreast of what's going on. You spoke about getting into the schools, education, the children. Maybe we should find some way to make it a policy to include something of this nature.
That would be excellent.
To work our young people into this so they'll fully understand. I think it's the way forward in terms of our development as a people.
Definitely, so that we can grow with it. And I think that is key for actually coming out with this quality culture that, we are promoting.
I want to thank you again. I was speaking just now to Mrs. Solange Baptist, the Manager Information Services at the Antigua and Barbuda Bureau of Standards. Also Mrs. Jem Reynolds, Manager Standards Development, and Mr. Alan Michael, Senior Standardization Officer. I want to thank all three of you for coming to us here at 99.1 FM. Do enjoy what's left of your day.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks.
You're listening to 99.1 FM. We're broadcasting from the heart of the Point and Villa community. We'll take a break. When we come back from the break, of course, we'll continue with Talking Point with me, Colin O'Neill. Don't go away. Don't go away. There's more to come. Stick around.
This is Point FM